The blizzard came screaming down from the mountains so fast that Katherine Garrett barely had time to realize she was going to die out here in the snow-choked wilderness of Montana Territory. She had left her father's ranch that morning in November of 1884, thinking she would make it to the neighboring Dawson place before noon to deliver medicine for their sick child. The sky had been clear then, crystalline blue stretching forever above the rolling prairie. But winter in Montana was a treacherous thing, and now the world had turned white and howling, the wind tearing at her coat like wolves, the cold seeping through every layer until her bones ached with it. Katherine's horse had thrown her an hour ago, spooked by the sudden whiteout, and bolted into the storm. She had been walking ever since, but her legs were growing heavy, her feet numb inside her boots. The medicine bottle was still clutched in her frozen fingers, though she knew it would never reach its destination now. Neither would she. She stumbled and fell to her knees in a snowdrift, the wind stealing her breath. Getting up seemed impossible. The cold wrapped around her like a shroud, and she thought of her father discovering her body come spring, frozen and still clutching that useless bottle. He had already lost her mother to consumption 2 years ago. This would break him completely. Katherine closed her eyes against the stinging snow. At least it would be quick, or so she hoped. She had heard that freezing to death was like falling asleep, peaceful at the end. She never heard the footsteps approaching, muffled by snow. She only knew someone was there when strong arms lifted her from the ground, pulling her against a solid chest. "I got you," a man's voice said close to her ear, rough and deep. "Stay with me now." Katherine tried to speak, but her jaw was locked with cold. She felt herself being shifted, felt the man adjusting his grip, and then he was moving, carrying her through the blinding storm. She could make out nothing of his face, only the dark shape of his hat, the collar of his coat turned up against the wind. She drifted in and out of awareness as he walked. Time became meaningless. She did not know if minutes passed or hours. The storm raged on, relentless, but the man carrying her never faltered, never stumbled. His arms remained steady around her, one beneath her knees, one supporting her back, holding her against his warmth. Finally, blessedly, they were out of the wind. Katherine heard a door slam shut, heard the sudden absence of the howling gale. She was being lowered onto something soft, and then there were blankets being piled on top of her, heavy and smelling of wood smoke and leather. "Got to get you warm," the voice said. "Can you hear me, miss?" Katherine managed a small nod. Her eyes fluttered open and she saw him for the first time. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and eyes the color of summer grass. Dark hair fell across his forehead, damp with melted snow. He was pulling off his coat, his movements quick and efficient, and she could see the concern etched in every line of his face. "Going to build up this fire," he said, moving to the stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the small cabin. "Get some heat in here." Katherine watched him work, her body shaking uncontrollably under the blankets. He fed logs into the fireplace, coaxing the embers to life, and soon flames were crackling and popping, throwing golden light across the rough-hewn walls. The cabin was sparse but sturdy, with a table and 2 chairs, a shelf holding supplies, a wash basin, and the bed where she lay when the fire was roaring. He came back to her side and began unlacing her boots. His hands were gentle despite their size, despite the calluses she could see marking his palms. "Got to get these wet things off you," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Your feet need warming or you'll lose your toes." He removed her boots and stockings, and Katherine gasped at the pain as feeling began returning to her feet. He wrapped them in a dry blanket, then moved to help her out of her coat. She tried to assist, but her fingers would not cooperate. "Easy now," he murmured. "Let me help." He removed her coat and the heavy wool shawl beneath it, both soaked through. Her dress was damp as well, and he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I know this is not proper," he said, his voice strained. "But if you don't get out of these wet clothes, the cold will kill you just as sure as the storm would have." Katherine understood. She managed to whisper, "It is all right." He nodded and turned away, giving her what privacy he could while he retrieved a dry shirt from a peg on the wall. He held it out to her without looking, and Katherine took it with shaking hands. She struggled out of her dress, her movements clumsy and slow, but eventually she managed to pull on the shirt. It was enormous on her, falling past her knees and warm from hanging near the fire. "Done," she whispered. He turned back and she saw relief cross his features. He took her wet dress and hung it near the fire to dry, then returned to pile more blankets over her. "There's some coffee in the pot," he said. "Should still be warm. I will get you some." He poured coffee into a tin cup and helped her sit up enough to drink. The liquid was bitter and strong, but it was warm, and Katherine felt it spreading through her chest like sunlight. She drank it all, and he poured her more. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." He set the cup aside and looked at her, those green eyes searching her face. "Could not leave you out there. How did you find me? I could not see 3 feet in front of me in that storm. I was heading back to this lined shack when I saw you fall. Was checking on the cattle in the north pasture when the storm hit." He gestured around the small cabin. "This belongs to the ranch I work for. We use it during winter months to shelter when we are out riding the range." "What ranch?" the Barrett spread. "I am Frank Barrett. I am the foreman." Katherine felt something shift in her chest. She had heard of Frank Barrett. Her father had mentioned him, said he was one of the best horsemen in the territory. That old man Barrett's son had come home from back east a few years ago and turned out to have a real gift for ranching. She had never seen him, though. Her father's ranch was small, just him and Katherine and 2 hired hands, and they kept to themselves mostly. "I am Katherine Garrett," she said. "My father is William Garrett. We have a small place about 10 miles southeast of here." Frank's eyes widened slightly. "I know your father. Good man. He will be worried about you. I was taking medicine to the Dawson place. Their youngest has croup. That is a long ride, especially with a storm coming. The sky was clear when I left this morning. I thought I had time." Katherine looked down at her hands, now wrapped in one of the blankets. "My horse threw me. I was stupid to go out alone." "You were trying to help a sick child," Frank said quietly. "That is not stupid. That is brave." Their eyes met and held for a moment, something passing between them that Katherine could not quite name. Then Frank cleared his throat and stood, moving back to the fire. "You should rest," he said. "Storm like this could last through the night. We are safe here, and come morning I will take you home." "The medicine," Katherine said suddenly, struggling to sit up. "I had a bottle. I must have dropped it." "I have it," Frank said, pulling the small brown bottle from his coat pocket. "You were still holding it when I found you." "Must be important." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. The Dawsons need it badly." "We will get it to them," Frank promised. "But first you need to recover your strength." Katherine lay back down, exhaustion pulling at her. The warmth of the fire and the weight of the blankets were making her drowsy, her body finally beginning to relax after the terror of the storm. She watched Frank move about the cabin, checking the fire, preparing what looked like stew from supplies stored in the cabin. He moved with easy confidence, comfortable in this rough space, and Katherine found herself studying him, this man who had appeared out of the blizzard like an answer to a prayer. She had not even thought to speak. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built for hard work. His clothes were worn but well maintained, his boots scuffed with use. Everything about him spoke of competence and strength, but there was gentleness, too, in the way he had carried her, in the care he had taken with her frozen feet. "How long have you worked for the Barrett Ranch?" she asked, wanting to hear his voice again. "Since I was 15, Frank said, stirring the pot over the fire. "But it is my family's ranch. My father started it 30 years ago, came out here with nothing but a wagon and a dream, built it into something real." "Your name is Barrett," Katherine said slowly. "The Barrett spread. It is your ranch." "My father's ranch," Frank corrected. "I just help run it." "That is not what I heard. I heard Frank Barrett saved the ranch from bankruptcy, turned it around in 3 years." Frank glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. "Folks talk too much. My father has respect for you. He does not give that easily." Something shifted in Frank's expression, a softness around his eyes. "Your father is a good rancher, works hard. I have respect for him too." The stew was ready and Frank brought her a bowl, helping her sit up to eat. The food was simple, beef and potatoes and carrots, but it tasted like the finest meal Katherine had ever eaten. She had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite touched her tongue. They ate in comfortable silence, the storm still raging outside but distant now, held at bay by thick walls and the crackling fire. Katherine found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around men who were not her father. Frank did not make her nervous or uncomfortable. There was something steady about him, something trustworthy. "You have family besides your father?" Frank asked after a while. "Just him. My mother died 2 years ago, consumption." "I am sorry. That is a hard thing." "It was." Katherine looked down at her bowl. "She was a good woman, strong. I try to be like her, but some days it feels impossible. I think carrying medicine through a blizzard to save a child shows you have her strength," Frank said quietly. Katherine looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. There was admiration there, certainly, but something else too, something deeper that made her breath catch. "What about you?" she asked, needing to break the intensity of that gaze. "Do you have family?" "My father and my younger brother Thomas. He is 20, helps on the ranch too. My mother died when Thomas was born. It has been just the 3 of us since then." Frank set his empty bowl aside. "We do all right. The ranch keeps us busy enough that there is not much time for anything else. No wife waiting for you at the main house." The question came out before Katherine could stop it, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Frank's expression remained neutral, but she thought she saw amusement flicker in his eyes. "No wife," he said. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Too busy with the ranch." Katherine nodded, focusing very hard on her stew. She did not understand why that information made something warm bloom in her chest, but it did. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Frank got up to check the door, making sure it was secure, then added more wood to the fire. Night was falling fast, darkness pressing against the small windows. "You should sleep," Frank said. "Take the bed. I will keep the fire going and watch the storm." "Where will you sleep?" "I will make do with the floor. Not the first time I have slept rough." Katherine wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. Her eyes were already closing, her body sinking into the mattress. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Frank settling down near the fire, his back against the wall, his eyes reflecting the flames as he gazed into the dancing light. She woke once in the deep hours of night, disoriented and cold despite the blankets. The fire had died down to embers, and she could see Frank's silhouette as he added wood, coaxing it back to life. He moved quietly, carefully, trying not to wake her. The flames caught and grew, pushing back the darkness, and Katherine felt herself relaxing back into sleep, safe in the knowledge that he was there, watching over her. Morning came pale and still. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Katherine woke to find sunlight streaming through the window, bright and clear, and the smell of coffee brewing. Frank was at the small stove, his back to her, and for a moment she just watched him, this man who had saved her life. "Morning," he said without turning around. "How are you feeling?" "Better, much better." Katherine sat up, testing her limbs. Her feet were sore but no longer numb, and the bone-deep cold had retreated. "How did you know I was awake?" "Heard your breathing change." Frank turned with 2 cups of coffee. "Here, it will help with the warmth." She took the cup gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch was brief, but Katherine felt it like a spark, electricity dancing across her skin. Frank felt it too. She could tell by the way his eyes widened slightly, the way he pulled back just a fraction too quickly. "Your dress should be dry," he said, his voice a little rough. "I will step outside while you change. Then we should head out. Need to get you home and that medicine to the Dawsons." He pulled on his coat and hat and went out into the brilliant morning, closing the door behind him. Katherine dressed quickly, grateful to be back in her own clothes even if they were a bit stiff from drying by the fire. She folded Frank's shirt carefully, setting it on the bed, then joined him outside. The world was blindingly white, snow piled high in drifts that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. The sky was a deep, endless blue, no trace of yesterday's fury remaining. It was beautiful and deadly, this winter landscape, and Katherine felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with cold. "How far to my father's ranch?" she asked. "In this snow, maybe 3 hours on foot, but I have my horse in the lean-to out back. We can ride double." "Cut that time in half." Frank went to saddle his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. He led the animal out and mounted with easy grace, then reached down to help Katherine up. She took his hand and he pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. She settled against his back, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep her balance, and felt his muscles tense beneath her touch. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice strained. "Going to be a rough ride through this snow." They set off, the horse plowing through drifts, sometimes up to its chest in powder. Frank guided them expertly, finding the paths of least resistance, keeping the horse moving at a steady pace. Katherine clung to him, her cheek pressed against his broad back, feeling the warmth of him through his coat. They talked little during the ride, the effort of navigating the snow-covered terrain taking all of Frank's concentration. But Katherine found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, the way their bodies moved together with the rhythm of the horse, the solid strength of him beneath her hands. She told herself it was just gratitude she felt, relief at being alive, but she knew it was more than that. Something had shifted in that cabin during the long night, something fundamental and frightening and wonderful. They reached the Dawson place first, a small homestead huddled in a valley. Frank rode right up to the door and helped Katherine down. She knocked and Mrs. Dawson answered, her face haggard with worry and sleeplessness. "Katherine," she breathed, "we heard about the storm. Your father was here at dawn asking if we had seen you." "I am fine," Katherine assured her, "and I have the medicine. How is little Sarah?" "Worse. The fever will not break." Mrs. Dawson's eyes filled with tears. "Please come in." Katherine followed her inside while Frank waited with the horse. The cabin was dim and hot, a fire roaring in the hearth. In a small bed against the wall, a child of perhaps 5 lay pale and listless, her breathing labored. Mr. Dawson sat beside her, holding her small hand, his face gray with fear. Katherine measured out the medicine carefully, the way the doctor had shown her, and helped Mrs. Dawson get it down the child's throat. Sarah whimpered but swallowed, then fell back against the pillows, exhausted by even that small effort. You need to give her another dose at sunset, Katherine instructed, and keep her cool. The fever is too high. Thank you, Mr. Dawson said hoarsely. Thank you for risking the storm to bring this. I am just glad I made it in time. Katherine touched Sarah's forehead gently. She is a strong girl. She will pull through. When she emerged from the cabin, Frank was still there, patient and watchful. He helped her mount again, and they continued on to her father's ranch. The sun was higher now, the temperature rising, and Katherine could hear the sound of snow melting, water dripping from eaves and branches. Her father's ranch came into view as they crested a ridge, the small house and barn looking like toys in the vast white expanse. As they rode into the yard, the front door flew open and William Garrett came running out, his face transformed with relief. "Katherine," he cried, reaching up to help her down from the horse. "Thank God, I have been sick with worry. When the storm hit and you did not come home, I thought the worst." "I am all right, Papa," Katherine hugged him tight. "Thanks to Mr. Barrett here. He found me in the storm and sheltered me in a line shack." William turned to Frank, who had dismounted and was standing a respectful distance away. "You saved my daughter's life." "I did what anyone would do," Frank said. "No," William's voice was firm. "Not everyone would have been out in that storm. Not everyone would have had the strength to carry her to shelter. You have my deepest gratitude, Mr. Barrett. If there is ever anything I can do for you, you have only to ask." Frank met Katherine's eyes over her father's shoulder. "No payment necessary, sir. I am just glad I found her in time." "At least come inside," William insisted. "Have some breakfast. It is the least I can offer." Frank hesitated, then nodded. "That would be welcome, thank you." They went inside and William immediately set about preparing food, his relief making him talkative. He fried eggs and bacon, made biscuits, his hands never still as he worked and talked. Katherine sat at the table with Frank, very aware of how small their kitchen was, how close their chairs were to each other. "Did you hear about the storm?" William asked as he cooked. "They are calling it one of the worst November blizzards in memory, 3 feet of snow in some places. Several people caught out in it. I heard the Miller boy from town is missing." "I will join the search party when I get back to the ranch," Frank said. "If he found shelter, he might still be alive." They ate, and Katherine watched the way her father and Frank talked, easy and respectful with each other. Her father clearly liked Frank, trusted him. When breakfast was finished, Frank stood reluctantly. "I should head back," he said. "Need to check on the cattle and see if any damage was done to the ranch buildings." "Of course." William shook his hand. "Thank you again. You are welcome here any time, Mr. Barrett." Katherine walked Frank out to where his horse stood waiting. The sun was bright, the snow already starting to melt in earnest, water running in small rivers across the yard. Frank gathered his reins, then paused, looking down at her. "I am glad you are safe," he said quietly. "Because of you," Katherine replied. "I would have died out there if you had not found me." Frank shook his head. "You are stronger than you think. You would have found a way to survive." "I do not think so." Katherine met his eyes. "But I am grateful that I did not have to find out." Frank mounted his horse, then looked down at her again. For a moment, Katherine thought he was going to say something more, but he just touched the brim of his hat in farewell and rode away. She watched him go until he was just a dark speck against the white landscape, then turned and went back inside. Her father was washing dishes, humming tunelessly, clearly still relieved to have her home safe. Katherine helped him dry, the familiar routine soothing after the chaos of the past day. "Good man, that Frank Barrett," William said after a while. "His father raised him right." "Yes," Katherine agreed softly. "He is a good man." That night, lying in her own bed, Katherine found herself unable to sleep. She kept remembering the feel of Frank's arms around her as he carried her through the storm, the gentleness of his hands as he removed her frozen boots, the way he had looked at her across the dinner table that morning. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was simply grateful to him, but her heart knew the truth. Something had changed in that cabin. Something had been born in the warmth and safety he had provided, and now it was growing inside her, tender and new and terrifying. The days that followed were ordinary ones. The snow began to melt, the temperature rising as November gave way to the promise of December. Katherine resumed her normal routine, helping her father with the ranch work, tending to the chickens and the small vegetable garden she had covered with straw for the winter, mending clothes and cooking meals. But her thoughts kept returning to Frank, to those green eyes and that quiet strength. She heard news of him through her father, who went into town for supplies and came back with reports. The Miller boy had been found alive, sheltered in a cave, and it was Frank Barrett who had found him. The Barrett ranch had come through the storm with minimal losses, thanks to Frank's preparations. Frank had helped the widow Henderson repair her barn roof that had collapsed under the weight of snow. Every story made Katherine's heart ache with a longing she did not fully understand. She wanted to see him again, to talk to him, to thank him properly for saving her life. But it would not be proper for her to ride to the Barrett ranch uninvited, and she had no excuse to do so anyway. 2 weeks after the storm, Katherine and her father made the trip into town. Centralia was the nearest settlement, a small but growing town in south-central Montana, nestled in the valley where several ranches came together to trade and socialize. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, a livery stable, and a handful of houses. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Katherine had always felt a fondness for the rough little town. They tied up their wagon outside the general store and went inside. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the store with her husband, greeted them warmly. "Katherine, so good to see you," she exclaimed. "We heard about your adventure in the storm. You must have been terrified." "It was frightening," Katherine admitted, "but Mr. Barrett found me and kept me safe." "Yes, we heard about that too." Mrs. Patterson's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Quite romantic, being rescued by a handsome cowboy." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It was not romantic, Mrs. Patterson. It was survival." "Of course, dear." But Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. They were looking at bolts of fabric when the bell over the door chimed and Katherine glanced up automatically. Her breath caught. Frank Barrett had just walked in, accompanied by a younger man who could only be his brother Thomas. They were both dressed for work, their hats dusted with dirt, their boots worn. Frank saw her immediately. Their eyes met across the store, and Katherine felt that same spark she had felt in the cabin, electricity jumping between them like lightning. Frank said something to his brother, then crossed the store to where she stood. "Miss Garrett," he said, touching his hat. "Good to see you. How have you been?" "Well, thank you, and you?" "Busy. The storm caused more damage than we thought at first. Spent the last 2 weeks making repairs." He glanced at the fabric in her hands. "Planning something, just a new dress. Mine are getting worn. Any color would look beautiful on you." The words were out before Frank seemed to realize what he had said. Color rose in his cheeks and he cleared his throat. "I mean, you would look nice in anything. That is, I am sure the dress will turn out well." Katherine smiled, charmed by his awkwardness. "Thank you, Mr. Barrett." "Frank," he said quickly, "please call me Frank, only if you call me Katherine." "Katherine." He said her name softly like a prayer. "It suits you." They stood there, smiling at each other until Thomas called from across the store. "Frank, we need to get the supplies and head back." "Got work waiting." Frank glanced over his shoulder, then back at Katherine. Would you and your father like to come to dinner at the ranch? This Sunday, maybe. My father has been wanting to thank you for delivering that medicine to the Dawsons. Sarah pulled through thanks to you." Catherine's heart leapt. "We would love to. Thank you for the invitation." "Good. That is good." Frank smiled, a genuine wide smile that transformed his face. "I will see you Sunday then." He tipped his hat and rejoined his brother. Catherine watched them gather their supplies and leave, her heart pounding like she had just run a mile. When she turned back to the fabric, she found Mrs. Patterson watching her with undisguised glee. "Not romantic at all," Mrs. Patterson said dryly. "Of course not." Catherine could not help but laugh. "Oh, hush." Sunday arrived cold and clear. Catherine spent the morning helping her father with chores, then went inside to change into her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. She brushed her hair until it shone, then braided it and wound it into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She told herself she was not trying to look pretty for Frank, but her reflection in the mirror, flushed and bright-eyed, told a different story. The ride to the Barrett ranch took an hour. As they drew closer, Catherine was impressed by the size of the operation. The main house was large and well-built, 2 stories of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Beyond it stood a massive barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various other outbuildings. Cattle dotted the hills in the distance, hundreds of them, maybe more. "This is quite a spread," William said, admiration evident in his voice. "Old man Barrett built something real here." They pulled up to the house and Frank emerged before they had even set the brake. He was cleaned up, his hair damp like he had just washed, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He looked nervous, Catherine realized, his hands fidgeting slightly at his sides. "Welcome," he said, helping Catherine down from the wagon. His hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. "My father is eager to meet you both." They were ushered inside to a large, comfortable room with a huge stone fireplace and furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. An older man stood by the fire, tall and graying but with the same strong build as his sons. This was clearly the elder Mr. Barrett. "William Garrett," he said, coming forward to shake her father's hand. "I have heard good things about you, and you must be Catherine. Frank told us how you risked the storm to bring medicine to a sick child. That shows real character." "Thank you, Mr. Barrett," Catherine said. "Though I did not make it very far. Your son is the real hero." "My son does not think of himself as a hero," the elder Barrett said with a fond glance at Frank. "But he is. Saved that Miller boy too, and half a dozen others over the years. Has a habit of being in the right place at the right time." Frank looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what needs doing." Thomas appeared then, equally cleaned up, and they all sat down to a dinner that was surprisingly good for a house full of men. There was roasted chicken and potatoes, vegetables preserved from summer gardens, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The elder Barrett explained that they had a cook who came in most days, a widow from town named Mrs. Chen who had needed work. The conversation flowed easily, talk of ranching and weather and the growth of Centralia. Catherine found herself relaxing, enjoying the company. The Barrett men were good people, she could tell, honest and hardworking with strong values. But her attention kept drifting to Frank, to the way he listened intently when others spoke, the way he smiled at his brother's jokes, the way his eyes kept finding hers across the table. After dinner, Frank offered to show Catherine around the ranch while their fathers talked business. Thomas joined them initially, but then excused himself to check on a horse in the barn, leaving Catherine and Frank alone. They walked toward the corrals where several horses stood in the weak winter sunlight. Frank leaned on the fence, his expression thoughtful. "I am glad you came today," he said quietly. "I am glad you invited us. I wanted to see you again. Have been wanting to since I left you at your father's place." Frank turned to look at her. "That probably sounds forward." "No," Katherine said softly. "It sounds honest." Frank reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers gently. "Katherine, I know we have not known each other long. Just that one night in the cabin, really. But I cannot stop thinking about you. Have not been able to think straight since I carried you out of that storm." Catherine's heart was hammering now, her whole body alive with awareness of his touch. "I've been thinking about you too, constantly." "I am just a rancher," Frank said. "I work hard, but I cannot offer you anything fancy, no big city life or fine things. Just this ranch and an honest living and a future that is uncertain like everyone else's." "I do not want fancy," Katherine said. "I want real. I want honest. I want someone who would risk a blizzard to save a stranger." "You are not a stranger." Frank's voice was rough with emotion. "You have not been a stranger since the moment I found you in that snow. I felt something then, holding you, keeping you safe. Something I have never felt before." "What did you feel?" Frank hesitated, then spoke the truth. "Like I had found something I did not know I was looking for, like I had found home." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Frank, I know it is too fast," he said quickly. "I know I should court you properly. Take time, but I need you to know how I feel. Need you to know that saving you was the most important thing I have ever done, not because you needed saving, but because it brought you into my life." Katherine stepped closer, looking up into his face. "It was important to me too, not just because you saved my life, but because you showed me what kind of man you are, strong and gentle and good. I have been waiting my whole life for someone like you, Frank Barrett, even though I did not know it until that storm." Frank's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Can I court you, Katherine? Can I come calling and see where this goes?" "Yes," she whispered. "Please, yes." He smiled then, that same transforming smile she had seen in the general store, and Katherine felt something settle in her chest, something warm and right. She knew, standing there in the cold December air with Frank's hand on her face, that her life had just changed forever. That the blizzard had not tried to kill her after all. It had brought her exactly where she needed to be. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they entered, both their fathers looked up from their conversation by the fire. Something passed between the elder Barrett and William Garrett, some unspoken understanding, and both men smiled. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. Frank came calling twice a week, riding the hour from his ranch to hers to spend the evening sitting in her father's parlor, talking and laughing, and getting to know each other. Sometimes they would sit by the fire, and Frank would tell her stories about the ranch, about growing up in Montana territory, about his dreams for the future. Other times they would play checkers or cards, their hands brushing as they reached for pieces, each touch sending sparks dancing across Catherine's skin. On Sundays, Katherine and her father would often join the Barretts at church in Centralia, and afterward they would share dinner, alternating between the two ranches. Katherine grew to love the Barrett family, to appreciate Thomas's easy humor and the elder Mr. Barrett's quiet wisdom. They, in turn, seemed to welcome her warmly, treating her as if she already belonged. But the best times were when Frank and Katherine could steal moments alone, walking in the snow-covered fields or sitting on the porch wrapped in blankets while her father tactfully found business elsewhere. It was during these times that they really talked, sharing their fears and hopes, their pasts and dreams. Katherine learned that Frank had been sent east to school when he was 18, that he had spent 3 years in Chicago learning business and hating every minute away from Montana. He had come home at 21 to find the ranch in trouble, his father aging and struggling to keep up with the work, and he had thrown himself into saving it. Through hard work and smart decisions, he had turned things around, but it had cost him any thought of a personal life. "I thought I would die a bachelor," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Thought I had missed my chance at love, that I had chosen the ranch over everything else and would have to live with that choice." "But you did not miss your chance," Katherine said softly. "No," Frank squeezed her hand. "The blizzard brought you to me. Fate or luck or God's plan, I do not know, but I am grateful." Katherine told Frank about her mother, about watching her waste away over months of illness, about the helplessness and grief that still sometimes overwhelmed her. She told him about the loneliness of being the only woman on a small ranch, about her worry for her father as he aged, about her fear that she would never find someone who understood the life she lived. "I understand," Frank assured her. "I know what it means to love this land, to be tied to it. I know the hardships and the beauty both. And I promise you, Katherine, if you will have me, you will never be alone again." As winter deepened and Christmas approached, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was in love with Frank Barrett. It was there in the way her heart leapt whenever she saw him riding up to her house, in the way she could not stop smiling when they were together, in the way she missed him like a physical ache when they were apart. On Christmas Eve, both families gathered at the Barrett Ranch for dinner. The house was decorated with pine boughs and candles, the smell of roasting goose filling the air. After the meal, they exchanged simple gifts, handmade things mostly, and sang carols around the piano that had been Frank's mother's. When the evening was winding down, Frank pulled Katherine aside. "Come outside with me," he said quietly. "I want to show you something." Katherine grabbed her coat and followed him out onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. Frank led her away from the house toward a small hill that overlooked the ranch. When they reached the top, he stopped and turned to her. "Katherine," he began, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I know we have not been courting long, just over a month. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of how I feel about you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Katherine's breath caught. "I love you," Frank said simply. "I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you laugh and the way you care for others and the way you look at the world. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much. Katherine Garrett, will you marry me?" He opened the box, and Katherine saw a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the starlight. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Frank, I will marry you. I love you too so much." Frank slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was their first kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise, and Katherine felt like she was flying, like the stars overhead were singing just for them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he whispered. "And you have made me the happiest woman," Katherine replied. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they entered, both families looked up expectantly. Frank held up Katherine's hand, showing the ring, and the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. William Garrett embraced his daughter, tears in his eyes, then shook Frank's hand. "Take care of her," William said gruffly. "With my life," Frank promised. The elder Barrett hugged them both, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Welcome to the family, Katherine." Thomas clapped his brother on the back. "About time you settled down, Frank. Was starting to worry you would marry that darn horse of yours instead." Everyone laughed, and the rest of the evening was spent in celebration. planning a wedding that would take place in the spring. Katherine sat close to Frank, her hand in his, the ring on her finger catching the firelight, and thought about how strange life was. A month ago she had been dying in a blizzard, certain her story was ending. Now she was engaged to the man she loved, her story just beginning. The winter passed in a blur of wedding preparations and continued courtship. Katherine and Frank spent as much time together as possible, though always properly chaperoned. They would take sleigh rides across the snowy landscape, bundled in blankets and stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. They would work together on small projects, Katherine teaching Frank how to make preserves while he taught her about managing cattle. Every moment together only deepened their love and their certainty that they were meant to be together. In February, Katherine's father made an announcement. He had decided to sell his small ranch to a neighbor and move in with Katherine and Frank after the wedding. He was getting older, he explained, and the work was becoming too much. Besides, he did not want to be alone anymore. "If you will have me," he said to Frank, "I can still work, help out on your ranch. I would not be a burden." "You could never be a burden," Frank assured him. "You are family now. We would be honored to have you." So it was settled. William Garrett would join the Barrett Ranch, adding his land to theirs through the sale agreement. It would make the Barrett spread even larger, more prosperous, and Katherine was glad that her father would be with them, part of their new life together. March brought the first hints of spring, snow melting to reveal the brown earth beneath, green shoots beginning to push through the ground. The wedding date was set for mid-April, when the worst of winter would be past, but before the busy summer season began, Katherine sewed her wedding dress with help from the women of Centralia, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and sleeves. She had never been one for fancy things, but she wanted to look beautiful for Frank, wanted him to see her walking down the aisle and know he had made the right choice. Frank, meanwhile, threw himself into preparing a home for them. The Barrett ranch house was large enough that the elder Mr. Barrett suggested Frank and Katherine take the entire second floor for their own private space. Frank cleaned and painted and brought in new furniture he had ordered from the catalog, a bed and dresser and washstand, a comfortable chair for Katherine to sit and read, curtains for the windows. "I want you to feel like it is yours," he told Katherine when he showed her the rooms. "Want you to be comfortable and happy." "I will be happy anywhere you are," Katherine replied, but she was touched by the effort he had put in, the care he had taken to make it beautiful for her. The week before the wedding, Katherine had a visitor. Mrs. Dawson came to the ranch with little Sarah, who was fully recovered and bright-eyed with health. The child ran to Katherine and hugged her legs. "Thank you for saving me," Sarah said solemnly. "Mama said you brought medicine in a storm." Katherine knelt and hugged the girl. "I am so glad you are well, Sarah. And I hear you are getting married," Mrs. Dawson said with a smile. "To the man who saved you, it is like something out of a storybook." "It does feel that way sometimes," Katherine admitted, "like none of it is quite real." "Oh, it is real, Mrs. Dawson assured her. "Love like that is the most real thing there is." The night before the wedding, Katherine lay in her bed at her father's ranch for the last time, unable to sleep. Tomorrow she would become Katherine Barrett. Tomorrow she would stand before God and everyone she knew and pledge her life to Frank's. Tomorrow her whole world would change again. She thought about that day in November, riding out in clear weather to deliver medicine, never imagining what the day would bring. She thought about the moment she had known she was going to die, kneeling in that snowdrift, the cold stealing her breath and her hope. She thought about Frank appearing out of the storm like a miracle, lifting her into his arms, his voice rough and urgent as he told her to hold on. She had asked him later, during one of their evening talks, why he had been out in the storm at all. It had been luck that he was checking the northern pasture when the blizzard hit, luck that he was heading back to the line shack at just the right moment to see her fall. "You believe in fate?" She had asked him. "I did not used to," Frank had replied, "but I do now. I think we were meant to find each other, Katherine. I think that storm happened for a reason." Katherine thought about that now, staring up at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe the blizzard had been fate's way of bringing them together, of showing them what they could be to each other. It was a strange thought, that something so deadly could lead to something so beautiful, but life was strange that way. Light and dark, death and life, all twisted together in ways you could never predict. She finally slept as dawn was breaking and dreamed of snow and strong arms and green eyes filled with love. Her wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect April morning with the smell of spring in the air. Katherine was up early, too nervous and excited to stay in bed. Her father made breakfast, but neither of them ate much, both too overwhelmed by the day ahead. Women from town arrived mid-morning to help Katherine dress and prepare. They chattered and laughed, doing her hair in an elaborate style that Katherine barely recognized as her own when she looked in the mirror. They helped her into her dress, fastening the tiny buttons down the back, arranging the lace just so. "Mrs. Patterson produced a veil, something borrowed," she said, and placed it carefully over Katherine's face. "You are beautiful," her father said hoarsely when Katherine emerged. "Your mother would be so proud." Katherine hugged him, careful not to crush her dress. "I wish she could be here." "She is here," William assured her. "In spirit she is here, and she is happy for you, Katherine. I know it." The wedding was being held at the church in Centralia, a small white building with a steeple and bell. It seemed like the entire town had turned out, crowding into the pews, spilling out onto the steps. Katherine could hear the murmur of voices as she and her father arrived in the wagon, could see faces turning to look at her. Her father helped her down and they walked toward the church. Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. This was it. This was the moment her life changed forever. Inside, the church was decorated with wildflowers, early blooms that must have been gathered from all over the territory. The sun streamed through the windows, painting everything gold, and at the front beside the minister stood Frank. He was dressed in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was the expression on his face that made Katherine's breath catch. He was looking at her like she was the sun and moon and stars all together, like she was everything he had ever wanted and more. There were tears on his cheeks, unashamed, and Katherine felt her own eyes fill in response. Her father walked her down the aisle and placed her hand in Frank's. Their fingers intertwined automatically, perfectly, like they had been made to fit together. The minister began to speak, but Katherine barely heard the words. She was lost in Frank's eyes, in the warmth of his hand holding hers, in the overwhelming feeling of rightness. Then Frank was repeating his vows, his voice strong and clear. "I, Frank Barrett, take you, Katherine Garrett, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." Katherine's own voice shook as she spoke. "I, Katherine Garrett, take you, Frank Barrett, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." The minister pronounced them husband and wife. Frank lifted her veil with trembling hands and kissed her, soft and sweet, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. They turned to face their friends and family as man and wife, and Katherine felt joy bubble up inside her like champagne, effervescent and golden. The reception was held at the Barrett Ranch, tables set up in the yard, food spread out in abundance. There was dancing and drinking and laughter, the celebration continuing long into the evening. Katherine danced first with her husband, then with her father, then with the elder Mr. Barrett and Thomas, and what felt like every man in the county. But her eyes kept finding Frank's across the crowd, and every time their gazes met, she felt that same spark, that same certainty that this was right. This was where she belonged. As the sun set and the dancing continued, Frank took Katherine's hand and led her away from the party. They walked up the hill where he had proposed, far enough from the house that the noise faded to a distant murmur. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the first stars beginning to appear. "Mrs. Barrett," Frank said softly, pulling her close. "My wife." "My husband," Katherine replied, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I cannot believe you are mine, that I get to hold you like this for the rest of my life." Katherine tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Frank, more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for choosing me." "You saved my life," Katherine said, "in more ways than one." They stood there as the sky darkened and the stars came out, holding each other, neither wanting to break the perfect moment. Finally, Frank spoke again. "You remember what you asked me?" "In the storm when I was carrying you," Katherine thought back. The memories of that day were hazy, blurred by cold and fear. "I do not remember much, just pieces. You whispered something. Your voice was so faint I almost did not hear it. You asked me why I was saving you, why I did not just leave you there and save myself." Katherine felt her throat tighten. "What did you say?" Frank cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense in the gathering darkness. "I told you the truth, even though you were barely conscious, even though I knew you probably would not remember. I said because I love you." Katherine stared at him in shock. "But we had just met." "You did not even know me." "I know. It did not make sense then and it does not make sense now, but it was true. From the moment I saw you fall in that snow, from the moment I lifted you into my arms, I loved you. Before I knew your name, before I knew anything about you, I loved you. And I have loved you every moment since." Tears were streaming down Katherine's face now. "Frank, I should have told you sooner," he continued, "but I was afraid. Afraid you would think I was crazy, that I was just grateful or caught up in the drama of the rescue. But it was real, Katherine. It has always been real." Katherine pulled him down and kissed him fiercely. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Frank promised. "I am yours, Katherine, for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," she whispered. "Forever and always." They returned to the party hand in hand and stayed until the last guest had left, until the tables were cleared and the yard was empty. The elder Mr. Barrett and Thomas and William Garrett all hugged them good night, then tactfully retreated to their rooms, leaving Frank and Katherine alone. Frank led his wife upstairs to the rooms he had prepared and closed the door behind them. The space was warm and welcoming, a fire crackling in the small fireplace, candles casting soft light. Katherine saw the care Frank had taken, the fresh flowers in a vase, the quilt on the bed that his mother had made years ago now passed to them. "It is perfect," she said. Frank came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "You are perfect." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, the reality of their marriage settling over them like a blanket. Then Frank turned her to face him and began to slowly, carefully, remove the pins from her hair. The elaborate style fell apart, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and Frank ran his fingers through it. "I have wanted to do that all day," he admitted. Katherine laughed and reached up to unbutton his vest. "And I have wanted to do this." They undressed each other slowly, taking their time, each button and tie a small revelation. When they finally lay together in the bed that would be theirs for the rest of their lives, Katherine felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. This was home. This was where she was meant to be. Frank was gentle and patient, showing her with touches and whispers how much he loved her, how precious she was to him. And Katherine gave herself to him fully, holding nothing back, trusting him with everything she was and everything she had. Afterward, they lay tangled together, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Frank traced lazy patterns on Katherine's bare shoulder, his touch feather light. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine replied honestly. Beyond happy. Beyond words." Frank kissed the top of her head. "I keep thinking about that day, the blizzard, how close I came to not finding you, but you did find me." "I did, and it changed everything. You changed everything, Katherine." She tilted her face up to kiss him. "You changed everything for me, too." They talked long into the night, making plans for their future, dreaming aloud about the life they would build together. They would expand the ranch, Frank said, maybe add sheep along with the cattle. Katherine wanted to start a real garden, grow vegetables and herbs to sell in town. They both wanted children, a house full of them, laughter and chaos and love. "I want to give them everything," Frank said. "A good home, a good life. Teach them to work hard but also to be kind. To value people over things, to know what really matters." "They will learn that from you," Katherine assured him. "You are the best man I know, Frank Barrett." "I am just a rancher," he said, echoing his words from that day by the corrals. "You are so much more than that. You are my husband. My love, my future." Frank pulled her closer, his arms tight around her. "And you are mine, now and always." They finally slept as dawn was breaking, wrapped in each other's arms, the beginning of their life together stretching out before them like the Montana prairie, vast and full of promise. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and growth. Katherine moved fully into the Barrett household, bringing her personal belongings and settling into the role of wife and ranch woman. The elder Mr. Barrett and Thomas welcomed her warmly, treating her like family from the start. Her father moved in as well, bringing his few possessions and a lifetime of ranching knowledge. Katherine quickly proved herself invaluable to the running of the ranch. She took over the household accounts, managing the books with a skill that impressed even the elder Mr. Barrett. She planted her garden and it flourished, providing fresh vegetables for the table and extras to sell in town. She learned to help with the cattle, riding out with Frank and the ranch hands during branding season, working from dawn to dusk without complaint. But her favorite times were still the quiet moments alone with Frank. Stolen hours in the evening when the work was done and they could just be together. They would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, or lie in bed and talk about their day, or take walks across the ranch land that was now theirs together. In September, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. Hope and fear warred in her chest as she waited another week, then two, then went to see the doctor in town. He confirmed what she already suspected. She was pregnant, due in the spring. Katherine rode home in a daze, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, hardly able to believe it. She was going to be a mother. She and Frank were going to have a baby. She found Frank in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up when she entered, a smile crossing his face automatically, but it faded when he saw her expression. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned, crossing to her side. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Katherine said, her voice shaking. "More than fine. Frank, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Frank just stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then a huge grin broke across his features, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses. He picked Katherine up and spun her around, laughing, before carefully setting her back on her feet. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Katherine, that is the best news I have ever heard. You are happy, happy. I am thrilled, overjoyed, beyond words." Frank cupped her face and kissed her tenderly. Thank you for this gift," they told the family that night at dinner. The elder Mr. Barrett got misty-eyed and toasted to the future Barrett generation. Thomas clapped Frank on the back and teased about hoping the baby inherited Katherine's looks rather than Frank's. William Garrett hugged his daughter tight, whispering that her mother would have been so proud. The winter passed slowly as Katherine's belly grew. She continued to work as much as she could, though Frank and the others tried to make her rest more. By February, she was large and uncomfortable, waddling more than walking, but she had never been happier. Frank doted on her constantly, bringing her pillows and making sure she ate enough, talking to her belly about the ranch and the horses, and how much he already loved the child growing inside. In late March, on a day when the first wildflowers were pushing through the melting snow, Katherine's labor began. It started slowly, dull aches in her back that gradually intensified. By evening, the pains were coming regularly, and Frank sent Thomas racing to town to fetch the doctor and the midwife. The labor was long and difficult. Katherine had heard stories from other women, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The pain that seemed to tear her apart, the exhaustion that made her want to give up. But Frank stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement. "You can do this," he told her as another contraction racked her body. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived a blizzard. You can survive this." "I cannot," Katherine gasped. "It is too much. You can. Look at me, Katherine, look at me." She met his eyes and found such love there, such faith in her, that she felt her resolve strengthen. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere. We are going to meet our baby soon. Just hold on." Finally, as dawn was breaking, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and the midwife placed him on Katherine's chest. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face and burst into tears. "He is beautiful," she whispered. Frank was crying too, unashamed, staring at his son with wonder. "He is perfect. Katherine, you did it. You brought him here." They named him William Frank Barrett after both grandfathers. Little Will, they called him, to distinguish him from his grandfather. He had Frank's green eyes and a shock of dark hair, and from the beginning he had a strong will and a loud voice. The household revolved around the baby for the next few months. Everyone took turns holding him, rocking him, singing to him. The elder Mr. Barrett was particularly smitten with his first grandchild, spending hours just watching him sleep. William Garrett carved toys for his namesake, tiny horses and cattle. Thomas proved surprisingly good with babies, able to calm Will when no one else could. But it was Frank who was the most transformed. Katherine watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. He was so gentle, so patient, changing diapers and pacing the floor during the night when Will would not sleep, singing lullabies in his rough voice. He talked to Will constantly, telling him about the ranch, making promises about the future they would share. "I will teach you to ride," Frank told his son one evening, holding him against his shoulder. "We will go out together, just you and me, and I will show you every corner of this land. And I will tell you about the day I found your mother in a blizzard, how she changed my life, how you are the greatest gift she has ever given me." Katherine, watching from the bed, felt her heart swell. This was everything she had ever wanted, even when she had not known to want it. A home, a family, a love that felt solid and eternal. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Will grew into a sturdy, curious toddler, then a bright, energetic child. When he was 3, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Frank's mother. She was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with Katherine's dark hair and Frank's green eyes. 2 years after Rose came another son, James, who proved to be a handful from the beginning, into everything, climbing before he could walk properly, keeping them all on their toes. The ranch prospered under Frank's management. They expanded their herds, added more land, built a new barn. Katherine's gardens grew larger each year, and she began selling preserves and vegetables at a small shop in town. Money was never abundant, but it was enough, and more importantly, they had each other. The elder Mr. Barrett passed away when Will was 7, dying peacefully in his sleep after a long, full life. They buried him on the ranch he had built, on a hill overlooking the valley, and Frank carved a headstone that read, "He built something that will last." William Garrett followed 3 years later, his health failing gradually until one winter morning he simply did not wake up. Katherine grieved, but she was grateful he had lived to see his grandchildren grow, to spend his final years surrounded by family. Thomas married when Will was 10, bringing home a sweet-natured woman from town named Sarah. They moved into the small house near the main barn and had children of their own, expanding the Barrett family further, through it all, through the seasons and the years and the changes life brought. Frank and Katherine's love remained constant. They still took walks together in the evening, still sat on the porch and watched the sunset, still found time to be alone together. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, raised children and built a life, and through it all they had never forgotten the day they met. Every November, on the anniversary of the blizzard, they would take a ride together to that lined shack where Frank had sheltered Katherine so many years ago. The cabin was still standing, maintained by the ranch as a useful shelter for riders, but to them it was something more. It was the place where their story had really begun. On the 20th anniversary of that day, Katherine and Frank made the familiar ride, now both in their 40s, their children nearly grown. Will was 17 and helping run the ranch. Rose was 14 and already beautiful, with a string of young men hoping to court her. James was 12 and still wild, but showing promise as a horseman. They reached the cabin and dismounted, tying their horses outside. Inside, it was much the same as Katherine remembered, spare but functional. Frank built a fire in the old fireplace while Katherine looked around, memories washing over her. "I was dying," she said softly. "That day, I had given up, and then you were there." Frank came to stand beside her, sliding his arm around her waist. "I was terrified I was too late. When I saw you fall, saw you just kneel there in the snow, I thought my heart would stop. You carried me all this way. Through that storm, I still do not know how you did it." "Love," Frank said simply. "I carried you because I loved you, even though I did not understand it yet. Even though we had never spoken, had never met, I loved you. And that love gave me the strength to get you here, to keep you safe." Katherine turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. It was lined now, weathered by years of sun and wind, but still handsome to her, still the face she loved most in the world. "I asked you why. Do you remember why save me?" "I remember. You told me, even then. Even when I was barely conscious, you told me the truth." Frank nodded. "Because I love you, that is what I said, and it has been true every day since, Katherine. I love you more now than I did that day, more than I did on our wedding day, more than yesterday. My love for you just keeps growing." "And mine for you," Katherine whispered. "You are everything to me, Frank Barrett. My savior, my husband, my home. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible." They kissed, tender and deep, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Thank you for finding me," Katherine said. "Thank you for holding on," Frank replied. "Thank you for fighting to stay alive long enough for me to get you here. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for the children and the life and the love. Thank you for everything, Katherine." They stayed in the cabin for hours, talking and remembering, holding each other close. Outside, the November day was clear and cold. Nothing like that blizzard 20 years ago, but inside the cabin, it was warm and full of love. As the sun began to set, they finally rode back to the ranch, back to their children and their life. But they carried with them the memory of that day, the day a blizzard had tried to take Katherine's life and instead had given her everything she had ever wanted. Years continued to pass. Will married a smart, capable woman and took over more of the ranch operations, working side by side with Frank. Rose married a teacher from Centralia and moved to town, though she visited often with her growing family. James went east to university but came back after 2 years, unable to stay away from the land he loved, and became the best horseman the ranch had ever seen. Frank and Katherine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never dimming. They became grandparents many times over, their house filled with the sound of children's laughter during visits. They watched the ranch continue to prosper under Will's management, knowing that what they had built would outlast them. On a spring evening when Frank was 62 and Katherine 60, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a familiar ritual after 40 years of marriage. Frank's hand was clasped in Katherine's, their fingers intertwined. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked. "The life we have had. So much work, so many hardships." Frank looked at her in surprise. "Regret? Katherine, I have never regretted a single moment, not one. This life with you has been better than anything I could have imagined. Even when we lost crops to drought, when disease took half the herd that one year. When money was so tight we did not know if we would make it. Even then," Frank said firmly, "because I had you beside me through all of it. Every hardship was bearable because we faced it together. Every triumph was sweeter because I could share it with you." Katherine smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way. I would not change a single thing about our life, Frank, not one moment. You remember what I used to tell you back when we were first married, about building something that lasts. I remember. We did it, Katherine. We built something real, something solid. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, our love. It is all going to last long after we are gone." "A good legacy," Katherine murmured. "The best," Frank agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. The Montana prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, the land they had loved and worked for 4 decades. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A horse whinnied in the barn. The evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and new grass. "I love you," Katherine said softly. "I love you too," Frank replied. "From that first moment in the blizzard until my last breath, I love you." Katherine thought about that day so long ago, how young and scared she had been, how certain of her death. She thought about Frank appearing out of the storm, strong and determined, refusing to let her go. She thought about him carrying her through the screaming wind and blinding snow, never faltering, never giving up. She thought about waking up in that cabin, safe and warm, and seeing his face for the first time. "You saved me," she said, "not for the first time." "You saved me too," Frank replied, as he always did. "In every way that matters." They sat together until full dark, then went inside to their home, their family, their life. The life that a blizzard had tried to end but instead had helped begin. the life they had built together through love and hard work and unwavering devotion. And as Katherine lay in bed that night, Frank's arms around her just as they had been every night for 40 years, she thought about fate and second chances, and the mysterious ways that life could surprise you. She had ridden out into a storm expecting to deliver medicine and return home. Instead, she had found love, partnership, a future she had never imagined. The blizzard had been the beginning of everything. The cold that had nearly killed her had instead brought her to the warmth she had been seeking all her life without knowing it. And the man who had carried her through that storm had been carrying her ever since, through every season of their lives, his love the constant that made everything else possible. Katherine fell asleep with a smile on her face, grateful for blizzards and cowboys and the perfect, improbable love that had saved her in every way a person could be saved. And beside her, Frank slept too, dreaming of the day he had found his whole world dying in the snow, and how carrying her to safety had been the most important journey of his life. Their story, born in a storm, had become a love that would weather any season, endure any hardship, last forever. Just as Frank had promised that very first day, when he had lifted Katherine into his arms and told her to hold on, they had held on to each other through everything. And they would continue to hold on, through whatever years remained to them, until their final breath and beyond. Because some love stories begin in the most unlikely ways, in blizzards and lined shacks and desperate rescues. But the best love stories, the ones that really matter, are the ones that last. The ones built on trust and partnership and devotion. The ones where two people choose each other every single day, through good times and bad, through storms and sunshine. Frank and Katherine Barrett had such a love. And it all began the day a cowboy carried a woman through a blizzard, and she whispered, "Why save me?" And he said, "Because I love you." Those words, spoken in desperation and truth, had been the foundation of everything that followed. They had built their lives on that foundation, and it had never wavered, never cracked. It had held strong through 4 decades of marriage, through children and grandchildren, through loss and triumph, through the everyday challenges of life. And it would continue to hold strong, that foundation of love, long after they were gone. It would live on in their children and grandchildren, in the stories told around dinner tables, in the ranch that bore their name and their legacy. Future generations of Barretts would hear about the blizzard, about the rescue, about the love that had bloomed in the aftermath of disaster. They would hear how Frank had refused to give up, had carried Katherine to safety when any reasonable person would have sought shelter for themselves. They would hear how Katherine had fought to stay alive, had held on with everything she had because somewhere deep inside she knew someone was coming for her. They would hear how love had saved them both, giving Frank the strength to make that impossible journey and giving Katherine the will to survive until he found her. And those future Barretts would understand that love like that was rare and precious, something to be treasured and protected and nurtured. They would understand that the truest love was not the easy kind, found in comfortable circumstances, but the hard-won kind, forged in fire and storm and challenge. They would understand that when you found someone worth saving, worth carrying through any blizzard, you held on to them with everything you had, and you never let go. Frank and Katherine Barrett had understood that from the very beginning. And they had lived it, every single day of their marriage, until their love became the stuff of legend in that part of Montana. People told their story in town, at church socials, around campfires. The story of the blizzard and the rescue and the love that followed. And always, when someone asked how they had made their marriage last so long, when so many others fell apart, Frank and Katherine had the same answer. They had learned early on that very first day that love was not just a feeling. It was an action, a choice, a commitment. It was picking someone up when they fell. It was carrying them through the storm. It was refusing to leave them behind no matter what. Frank had carried Katherine through that blizzard 40 years ago. But in truth, they had been carrying each other ever since. Through sickness and health, through good times and bad, through every storm that life threw at them. They had taken turns being strong when the other was weak, being hopeful when the other despaired, being the steady ground beneath each other's feet. That was the secret, they would say. Not romance or passion or grand gestures, though those had their place, but the everyday choice to be there, to show up, to carry and be carried in turn. That was what made a marriage last. That was what made love real. And so they lived out their days on the ranch they loved, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that mattered, something that would last. Something worthy of that frozen day when Frank Barrett had appeared out of a blizzard to save Katherine Garrett's life, and in doing so had saved his own. Because that is what love does. It saves us. It transforms us. It makes us better than we ever thought we could be. And when it is real, when it is true, it lasts forever. Through storms and sunshine, through every season of life, through death and beyond. Frank and Katherine Barrett knew this truth bone deep. And their love, born in a blizzard, tested by time, strengthened by commitment, stood as proof that the best stories are not the ones that begin easily or end quickly. The best stories are the ones where two people find each other against all odds, and then spend the rest of their lives choosing each other, over and over again. And when they were very old, when their children and grandchildren gathered around to hear the story one more time, Frank and Katherine would tell it with the same emotion they always did. Frank's voice would shake as he described finding Katherine in the snow. Katherine's eyes would fill with tears as she remembered him lifting her into his arms. And when they got to the part where she had whispered, "Why save me?" and he had answered, "Because I love you," their hands would find each other automatically, fingers intertwining, and everyone would understand that this was not just a story from the past. It was their present, their future, their forever. This was the legacy they would leave behind. Not just a successful ranch or healthy children or accumulated wealth, though they had all those things, but a legacy of love, real and true and lasting. A legacy that proved love was worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth holding on to through every storm that life could bring. And someday, when Frank and Katherine had both passed on and joined the loved ones who had gone before them, their descendants would still tell the story, would still speak of the blizzard and the rescue and the profound love that followed, would still hold it up as an example of what love should be, what it could be, when two people committed themselves fully to each other. The story would become part of the Barrett family history, passed down through generations, never forgotten. And always, at the end, someone would say the words that had started it all, the words that had saved two lives and created a love that would echo through the ages. Why save me? Because I love you. 5 simple words. But they contained everything that mattered. Everything that was true and real and worth holding on to in this uncertain world. And they were the perfect beginning to a love story that would never end, not really, because true love never dies. It just transforms, becoming memory and legacy and inspiration for all who come after. Frank and Katherine Barrett had lived that truth. And in doing so, they had left behind something far more valuable than any material wealth. They had left behind proof that love conquers all, that it is worth any hardship, that it can transform tragedy into triumph and strangers into soulmates. All because one man refused to leave a woman to die in a blizzard. All because he carried her to safety when it would have been easier to save himself. All because when she asked why, he told her the truth his heart knew even if his mind did not understand it yet. Because I love you. Those words had saved her life. And they had defined every day that followed for both of them, for 40 years and more. They were the foundation, the touchstone, the eternal truth that made everything else possible. And so the story ended where it began, with love, with commitment. With two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had chosen to build something beautiful together. Something that would last long after the snow had melted and the storms had passed. Something eternal. The cowboy had carried her through the blizzard. She had whispered, "Why save me?" He had said, "Because I love you." And from those simple words, spoken in desperation and truth, had grown a love that would never die, a story that would never be forgotten, a legacy that would inspire countless others to believe in the transforming power of love. This was their story, Frank and Katherine Barrett, and it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth holding up as proof that love, real love, the kind that saves and transforms and endures, is the greatest force in the world. Greater than any storm, stronger than any hardship, more powerful than death itself. They had lived that truth. And in doing so, they had given the world a gift, the gift of their story, the gift of their example, the gift of hope that true love exists, and when you find it, when you are blessed enough to experience it, you hold on to it with everything you have and you never, ever let go. Because that is what Frank had done that day in the blizzard. He had held on to Katherine and refused to let go. And she had held on to him in return. And they had been holding on to each other ever since, through everything life brought, until holding on had become so natural, so fundamental to who they were, that they could not imagine any other way of being. This was love. Not the fairy tale kind that solved all problems and made everything easy, but the real kind that gave you strength to face the problems together. The kind that made you better, braver, stronger than you ever could have been alone. Frank and Katherine Barrett had found that love in the most unlikely place, in the heart of a deadly storm. And they had nurtured it, protected it, lived it every single day until it became the greatest testament to what was possible when two people truly committed themselves to each other. And now, as their story drew to its natural close, as they lived out their final years in the home they had built and the love they had created, they could look back with no regrets, only gratitude. Gratitude for the blizzard that had brought them together. Gratitude for the life they had shared. Gratitude for every moment, every challenge, every joy. They had built something that would last, a love that would echo through time, a legacy that would inspire others. And it had all begun with 5 simple words spoken in truth and acted upon with unwavering commitment. Why save me? Because I love you. The cowboy carried her through the blizzard. She whispered, "Why save me?" He said, "Because I love you." And from that moment forward, they had lived those words every single day until their love became legendary, their commitment absolute, their story eternal. This was the story of Frank and Katherine Barrett. And it was a story that proved love was real, that it could save you, transform you, give your life meaning and purpose. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth believing in. And so it would be told, for generations to come. The story of the blizzard and the rescue and the profound, enduring love that followed. The story of two people who found each other against all odds and then spent their lives proving that love, real love, the kind worth fighting for, could overcome anything. The cowboy carried her through the blizzard. She whispered, "Why save me?" He said, "Because I love you." And they lived happily ever after, not because their life was easy or perfect, but because they faced it together, holding on to each other through every storm, every challenge, every season of life. Together, always together, until the very end and beyond. This was their truth. This was their legacy. This was their love.